Mark Capelli, the Federal Steelhead Recovery Coordinator, made a remarkable presentation recently on steelhead recovery and the Arroyo Seco to Matt Conloff's class at UC Berkeley. It is a fascinating lecture on the history, genetics, and future of this wonderful trout, emphasizing how important the Arroyo Seco is in the Los Angeles River region for its recovery. The narration is directly from Mark Capelli's speaking notes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. Dr. Conloff asked if I might say a few words about steelhead recovery in Southern California and the Arroyo Seco. I'll begin with some background on this species to provide some context and include some recent research that is relevant to guiding effective recovery efforts for this species in Southern California. There are 6 species of Pacific anadromous salmonids, salmon and steelhead, which are widely distributed throughout the North Pacific. Collectively, their natural spawning range covers the entire North Pacific Ocean. The diversity exhibited by this suite of species is reflected in the range of habitats that they utilize, from the subarctic to desert terrestrial landscapes. Steelhead are the most widely distributed of the 6 anadromous Pacific salmonids. Their natural spawning range covers the entire North Pacific Ocean and extends from northern Japan and Kamchatka Peninsula in the western Pacific and from Alaska to northern Baja in the eastern Pacific. Because of their natural range, they have also been introduced to every continent on Earth, except the Antarctic. During the 1990s, NOAA Fisheries, NMFS, conducted a series of status reviews of West Coast populations of Pacific salmon and steelhead. In 1994, NMFS received a petition seeking protection under the ESA for 178 populations of steelhead in Washington, Idaho, Oregon, and California. In 1997, NMFS undertook a comprehensive status review of the populations of West Coast Pacific anadromous salmonids. Subsequently, NMFS listed 10 distinct population segments, evolutionarily significant units, under the U.S. Endangered Species Act, 8 as threatened and 2 as endangered. In 2002, NMFS extended the geographic range of endangered Southern California steelhead from the Santa Monica Mountains south to the U.S.-Mexico border. The ESA allows the listing of distinct population segments of a recognized taxonomic species, providing there is a scientific basis for distinguishing population segments. The question of distinguishing distinct population segments was, therefore, one of the first issues that had to be addressed in listing the species under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Steelhead and rainbow trout had been extensively studied in the northern part of their natural range, but had not been subjected to coast-wide studies. In particular, there were virtually no scientific studies of steelhead at the southernmost extent of their natural range in California. One of the first scientific efforts to distinguish populations of a single taxonomic species, Oncorhynchus micus, of Pacific salmonids across the landscape was undertaken by a doctoral student UC Berkeley, Jennifer L. Nielsen, in the early 1990s. Nielsen used the frequency of mtDNA haplotypes, MYS5, MYS8, and MYS12, and MYS21, to identify the genetic structure of steelhead populations from Alaska to Southern California. 2 haplotypes, MYS5 and MYS8, were only found in California populations of steelhead, starting in Northern California and extending to Southern California. The proportion of these 2 haplotypes in the total genome increased southward, suggesting a distinct latitudinal population structure for West Coast steelhead. Nielsen also identified a biogeographic break at point conception that generally coincided with the distribution of northern and southern marine species, including invertebrates and algae, as well as the distribution of many terrestrial species of plants. Nielsen relied on relatively few sample sites, but her efforts suggested there was a geographic structure to the single taxonomic species, Oncorhynchus micus. Subsequent genetic work by Dr. Carlos Garza and others in NMFS Santa Cruz Laboratory, using neutral genetic markers, supported the concept of geographically structured steelhead populations, but the existing listing boundaries do not match up with the genetic breaks identified by Garza et al., 2014. Steelhead found in the south half of California were placed in the South Central/Southern California Steelhead Recovery Planning domain. Ultimately, NMFS identification of listing boundaries between South Central and Southern California steelhead populations, Busby et al. 1996, was based mainly on ecological factors. The shift from coastal redwood forest in the north to coastal shrubland and chaparral vegetation in the south, at the northern end of the South Central California steelhead populations, and The shift in orientation from coastal mountain ranges to transverse ranges at the northern end of the Southern California steelhead populations. Steelhead are an anadromous species, which means they grow to maturity in the marine environment and return to spawn in freshwater, rivers, streams, and lakes. The typical life cycle model for anadromous fish is a simple circular pattern, with linear pathways, temporally and spatially, between individual life stages in freshwater, egg, alevins, fry, par, smolt. More recent research of southern populations has revealed a more complex pattern. Individual fish move back and forth between fresh, brackish, and even marine habitats and spend varying amounts of time in each of them, depending on changing rearing conditions. These variable life histories have been categorized based on the dominant rearing habitat used by individuals within a single population. This life history diversity is a reflection of the adaptations to the naturally dynamic environment of Southern California. After listing, the recovery planning for the listed species began by assembling a technical recovery team, TRT, charged with developing the scientific foundation and framework for the recovery plans. The TRT published a series of peer-reviewed NOAA technical memorandum on a wide variety of topics, which provided the scientific basis for the development of the Southern California Steelhead Recovery Plan, 2012. The effort led to some basic conclusions and understandings. Steelhead were naturally widely distributed in Southern California watersheds that discharged to the Pacific Ocean. The current distribution continued to be widespread, with remnant populations of either resident freshwater or anadromous forms in most watersheds. However, about one-third of the watersheds for which there was historic evidence of steelhead runs no longer supported annual runs. These are watersheds at the southernmost extent of the range in California, and in watersheds which had been developed with dams that block fish passage to the upper reaches of watersheds with prime steelhead spawning and rearing habitats. Virtually all of the remaining steelhead runs in Southern California had been severely reduced and are vulnerable to extirpation, hence their listing as endangered. The Southern California Steelhead Planning Area was divided into 5 biogeographic populations groups, BPGs, for management and conservation purposes. These are composed of a suite of proximate watersheds that exhibit a set of distinctive physical, hydrological, and biological features. Together, these 5 BPGs represent the natural environmental diversity of the Southern California Steelhead Planning Area. These differing environmental conditions represent selective pressures that have led to the species diversity and upon which the long-term viability of the species depends. In 2016, a genetic survey was conducted of the major historically steelhead-bearing watershed in Southern California, including populations within the upper watershed of the Los Angeles River, Abadia Cardoso et al. 2016. There is genetic evidence of mixed anadromous and non-anadromous ancestry in O. micus populations in the southern coastal watersheds, with an increase of hatchery influence towards the southernmost watersheds. Southern California watersheds are occupied by a combination of the anadromous, or sea-run, form and the non-anadromous, or freshwater resident form, of O. micus, which can and do interbreed. Recent genetic studies have confirmed that the anadromous and resident forms of O. micus that interbreed are closely integrated at the population level. Depending on the genetic makeup of individuals, either can produce progeny that assume either an anadromous or non-anadromous life history. The two forms and their related life histories mutually help perpetuate the other form under varying conditions in the marine and freshwater environment. Recent studies of the genetic structure of O. micus have identified a region of one of the chromosomes that has an inversion, i.e. the order of the base pairs has been reversed, that plays a role in both the anadromous and non-anadromous behavior of O. micus. This work has provided a deeper understanding of the genetic basis of anadromy and the relationship between the anadromous and non-anadromous forms. With that background, the remainder of the talk will focus on the recovery of the endangered Southern California steelhead. Southern California watersheds are occupied by a combination of the anadromous, or sea-run, form and the non-anadromous, or freshwater resident form, of O. micus, which can and do interbreed. Recent genetic studies have confirmed that the anadromous and resident forms of O. micus that interbreed are closely integrated at the population level. Depending on the genetic makeup of individuals, either can produce progeny that assume either an anadromous or non-anadromous life history. The two forms and their related life histories mutually help perpetuate the other form under varying conditions in the marine and freshwater environment. The basic conceptual framework was set forth in NMFS Technical Memorandum, Viable Salmonid Populations, and the Recovery of Evolutionary Significant Units. NOAA Technical Memorandum, NMFS and WFSCTM, 42. The four quantifiable metrics used to assess the viability of a listed species are abundance, the number of individual in a population; biological productivity, the reproductive rate of a population or suite of populations; biological diversity at the genotypic, phenotypic, and behavioral level; and spatial distribution across the landscape of the species' natural range. The Los Angeles River watershed is part of the Mojave Rim biogeographic population group that includes two other major watersheds to the south, San Gabriel and the Santa Ana rivers. The Arroyo Seco is the principal tributary to the Los Angeles River, with a majority of the steelhead spawning and rearing habitats located in the upper reaches of the watershed. Upper Arroyo Seco is located within the Angeles National Forest and contains suitable steelhead spawning and rearing habitat. Following the 2020 Bobcat fire, CDFW led a fish rescue in the West Fork San Gabriel River, WFSGR, and Bear Creek, tributary to WFSGR, in Los Angeles County, within the Angeles National Forest. Subsequently, the rescued native coastal rainbow trout, Oncorhynchus micus iridius, were translocated to the Arroyo Seco in Los Angeles County, within the Angeles National Forest. However, this habitat is located upstream of the Brown Mountain Dam, which was constructed during World War II as part of the U.S. Forest Service Los Angeles River Watershed Program, is currently filled with sediment and provides no flood control or water supply benefits. This table summarizes the systemic threats to the steelhead populations in the major watersheds in the Mojave Rim biogeographic population group. The four highest threats for the Los Angeles River, including the Arroyo Seco, are dams, flood control activities, levees, urban development, roads, urban runoff, demands of water supplies, etc. Basic goals: 1. Preserve diversity. 2. Protect against catastrophic disturbances. To achieve this recovery goal requires recovery of minimum number of populations in each of the 5 BPGs, dispersed across the landscape, including drought refugia, with minimum geographic separation between populations, and exhibiting the full range of life history diversity. The recovery of steelhead in Southern California is ambitious, perhaps one of the most challenging of the species listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Aside from solid science, it requires a broad vision, strong leadership, and steadfast commitment at the national, state, and local levels. High-priority recovery actions track identified significant systemic threats to the steelhead populations of the Los Angeles River, including the Arroyo Seco. This word cloud from a previous State of the Union address, February 19, 2011, reflects that vision and leadership which is essential for the recovery of Southern California steelhead and the habitats upon which they and we depend. Thank you.